They called for help, but it was the Deathworlders who responded. HFY, the planet of Zurath, had known peace for millennia. The Zurathians, a race of tall, slender beings with green, bioluminescent skin, had always lived in harmony with their world. Their civilization was advanced, filled with incredible technology and knowledge, but they had never seen war. Their planet's ecosystem, though abundant and lush, had its dangers. Vast jungles filled with predators, oceans teeming with colossal creatures, and skies that occasionally darkened with ferocious storms. Yet despite the dangers of their environment, the Zurath had always found a balance, working with the world around them rather than against it. But now, that balance was at risk. The Scifi, a brutal and technologically advanced empire from beyond the galaxy's core, had set their sights on the Zurath homeworld. They came not to trade or explore, but to conquer. Their army was vast, their weapons far beyond anything the Zurath could hope to defend themselves against. And worse still, the Scifi cared little for the lives they destroyed along the way. For weeks, the Zurath had fought a losing battle, their peaceful ways no match for the relentless assault of the Scifi war machines. Cities had been reduced to rubble, forests burned, and entire populations taken as slaves or slaughtered. The Zurath had never known such destruction, never seen the horrors of war unfold so quickly before their eyes. Desperate and defeated, the Zurath government made a choice they never thought they would. They sent out a call for help. The signal was broadcasted across the stars, a desperate plea for aid to any civilization that might listen. The message was simple, raw, and filled with the raw emotion of a dying people. "We are the Zurath. Our world is under attack. We need help. Please, someone answer our call." The message was sent into the vast expanse of space, hoping that some alien race, some distant empire would hear and respond. They had no choice but to trust that somewhere out there, someone might be able to help them. The message spread far and wide across dozens of light years, reaching hundreds of advanced civilizations. But no response came. For days, there was silence. The Zurath waited, holding on to the hope that someone, anyone, would respond to their call. The leaders of their world gathered in the planet's capital, a gleaming city filled with towering spires and delicate bridges of crystal. But even here in the heart of their civilization, fear was starting to take root. Time passed. The Scifi forces continued their relentless assault, and the Zurath were pushed back further and further. Refugees fled to underground bunkers, desperate to escape the firestorms raining down from above. The Zurath's once pristine world was turning into a wasteland. Still no help arrived. The Zurath leaders gathered once more. This time the mood in the room was different. There was no longer hope, only resignation. They had sent out their message, and it had been ignored. The galaxy, vast and filled with countless beings, had turned a blind eye to their plight. They were alone, and they would have to fight for survival on their own. But just as the room grew heavy with despair, something changed. The faintest flicker appeared on the monitoring screen. A signal, a response. It wasn't from one of the more advanced galactic powers. It wasn't from a familiar race they knew of from centuries of interstellar diplomacy. No, this was something else entirely. The message was brief, and it had an edge of finality that sent a chill through the room. The words were simple. "We've heard your call, we are coming." The message didn't identify the sender. It didn't say who was coming or from where, but the tone was unmistakable. Whoever had sent the message wasn't afraid of the Scifi. In fact, there was an almost cold confidence in the words. The Zurath leaders weren't sure whether to feel hope or fear. Had someone actually heard their call? Could they truly be coming to their aid? Minutes passed, then hours. The Zurath anxiously awaited more communication, hoping for further details, but the response never came. The screen went blank, leaving them in a state of uncertainty. Far away, beyond the core of the galaxy, a planet known as Earth lay in a system filled with dangers. It was considered one of the least advanced planets in the known galaxy, its people primitive by the standards of most civilizations. Earth had survived through the centuries not because of its technological might, but because of its ability to adapt. Earth's inhabitants were survivors, accustomed to the deadly wildlife, unpredictable weather, and dangerous natural disasters that plagued their world. And Earth had a reputation. The galaxy knew it as a death world, a planet where survival was a constant struggle, where even the most basic of resources could be life-threatening. Only the strongest of creatures could survive on Earth, Both the flora and fauna were vicious, hostile, and at times incredibly dangerous. Humans, the dominant species on Earth, were known as Deathworlders across the galaxy. Their planet's hostile environment had shaped them into a resilient, resourceful, and highly adaptable species. They had learned to fight, to survive, and to protect what was theirs. Earth was a world that forged strength from adversity, and the humans that came from it were no different. When the message from Zurath reached Earth, it was initially ignored. There were debates among the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, with some dismissing the Zurath's plea as a trap or a desperate act from a doomed race. But the humans, with their pride and history of survival against all odds, saw something different in the message. Captain Lucian Hayes, a battle-hardened leader of a small elite group known as the Earth's Vanguard, listened carefully to the call. He had fought in countless skirmishes, from the ruins of alien cities to the dark and hostile wastelands of his own planet. Hayes had led Earth's toughest warriors and diplomats across the galaxy. He had seen the worst that space had to offer, and he knew when a situation required a swift and decisive response. Unlike the galactic powers that had dismissed the Zurath's call, Hayes saw an opportunity. The Scifi were a threat, one that could not be ignored, and the Zurath's world, a planet teetering on the edge of destruction, needed help. No one else was going to come, but the humans, they were not like the others. They did not fear the unknown. They were not afraid to fight, to take risks. Hayes made a decision that would forever change the course of history. He activated the signal to his team, preparing them for the mission ahead. A small fleet, equipped with Earth's best soldiers, technology, and resources, would make the journey to Zurath. They would answer the call not out of obligation, but because they saw a challenge they could not ignore. In the midst of the galaxy's indifference, humanity had decided to step forward. The Deathworlders were coming. Captain Lucian Hayes stood before the vast viewport of the Vanguard's flagship, the Eagle's Crest, watching the stars stretch out in front of him. The ship was cutting through space at faster-than-light speeds, its sleek, formidable frame barely visible against the black void of the galaxy. On this journey there were no distractions, no luxuries. Only the cold, vast expanse of space and the faint glimmer of distant stars. It was a constant reminder of how small they were in the grand scheme of the universe. But Captain Hayes knew that Earth's Deathworlders had never let the vastness of space scare them. They had survived against all odds on their home planet, a world teeming with dangers at every turn. If they had learned anything from their harsh environment, it was to adapt, survive, and fight. The signal from Zurath had come at the perfect moment. Hayes and his team had just finished a campaign on the far side of the galaxy, eliminating a rogue alien faction that had been terrorizing neutral colonies. They had lost men, endured hardship, and faced impossible odds. But now, with the message from Zurath echoing in their minds, there was something else on the horizon, something that called to them like a challenge that no one else was willing to answer. Hayes turned away from the viewport, his sharp eyes scanning the war room. He was not alone. The crew of the Vanguard, a team of elite soldiers, technicians, and medics, were gathered around a large table, their faces grim. The room was filled with the quiet hum of machines, the glow of holographic displays reflecting off their faces. "Captain, are we sure about this?" asked Sergeant Myra Delgado, a tough, no-nonsense soldier with a reputation for being able to outfight anyone on Earth. Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "We're talking about answering a distress call from a planet under siege by the Scifi. Are we really the ones they should be relying on?" Lucian's gaze hardened. "We're the only ones who answered," he replied. "The galaxy has turned its back on Zurath. We're not just going to leave them to die." Delgado nodded, though her face still betrayed her concern. "I know, but they're not asking for just any help. They want a miracle. And that's what we're going to give them," Hayes said firmly. "If anyone can pull this off, it's us. We'll make it happen." He moved to the holographic display at the center of the room and pointed to a three-dimensional map of Zurath's galaxy. The planet was a beautiful place, lush forests, expansive oceans, and towering mountains, but the map was marked with red dots. Each one represented an area under attack. The Scifi had made their move quickly, overrunning cities and military bases in the first wave. By the time the Zurath had sent their distress signal, half the planet had already fallen into chaos. "We'll be landing in a contested area near the planet's largest city," Hayes continued. Our mission is twofold: secure a safe zone for Zurath civilians and disrupt Sithari operations. We've got limited intel on their forces, but we know they have advanced tech. We'll need to be smart about this. No head-on attacks. We'll go in silent, strike hard, and get out. Delgado raised her hand. What about the civilians? We've seen what happens when a planet's occupied by the Sithari. If we don't get them out, the invasion will just keep spreading. We'll be working with the Zurath to evacuate as many as we can, Lucian replied. But first, we need to stop the bleeding. They can't rebuild their society if they're still under fire. Once we've secured an area, we'll focus on getting their civilians to safety. The room fell silent as everyone processed the plan. There was a lot of uncertainty, but Lucian could see the resolve in their eyes. The Vanguard had seen worse, and they had always come out on top. This would be no different. The Sithari were ruthless, but so were they. Prepare your gear, Hayes ordered. We drop in 5 hours. Get ready for a hell of a fight. The crew dispersed, each member heading to their designated tasks. Some would check the ship's weapon systems, others would review their mission objectives, and a few would engage in their own personal rituals before the fight. The crew of the Vanguard was a family. They had been through countless battles together, and no matter how dangerous the mission was, they always had each other's backs. Lucian walked down the corridor of the ship, his boots echoing softly in the silence. He made his way to his quarters, where a small terminal awaited him. His fingers danced over the controls, pulling up the Zurath's distress message once again. The desperation in their voices haunted him. Their planet, their people, were on the brink of extinction. And yet no one else had stepped forward to help. He had been asked to lead this mission, and he was not going to fail. He glanced down at the photo on his desk, a picture of his family back on Earth. His wife, his young daughter, both smiling up at him. He kept the photo close, a reminder of what he was fighting for. They would never understand the galaxy's indifference, the harsh realities of war. But he would make sure his daughter would grow up in a world where humanity didn't back down when others needed them. The door to his quarters opened, and Sergeant Delgado stepped in. "Captain, you wanted to see me?" Lucian stood up from his desk and turned to face her. "Delgado, you've been with me on every mission since the beginning. You've always had my back. I need to know you're ready for this one." She met his gaze without hesitation. "You don't need to ask, sir. I'm ready." He nodded, his expression softening just for a moment. "We all are, but remember, this isn't just about fighting. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity doesn't turn its back on those in need. The Zurath may not be human, but we've all been in their position at some point, and we're going to make sure they know we'll fight with them, not against them." Delgado gave a small, determined smile. "We're the Deathworlders. We don't back down. Let's show the Sithari what happens when they mess with us." The two exchanged a knowing look, and Lucian felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't going to be easy, but he was leading the right team. The Vanguard was the best humanity had to offer, and they weren't afraid of a challenge. If anyone could take down the Sithari and save Zurath, it was them. "Get some rest, Sergeant. We've got a long day ahead." Delgado saluted and left, leaving Lucian alone once more. He stared at the photo of his family again, a quiet determination building within him. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were not just answering a call for help. They were about to change the fate of an entire planet. The Eagle's crest descended through the atmosphere of Zurath like a giant bird of prey, its engines roaring as the ship broke through the clouds. Below, the planet's surface stretched out in all its alien beauty, vast jungles of towering trees, rivers winding like serpents through the land, and mountains that seemed to pierce the sky. But the beauty of the planet was marred by the chaos unfolding across its surface. From the ship's viewport, Captain Lucian Hayes could already see the smoldering ruins of once proud cities, their towering spires reduced to nothing more than twisted metal and stone. The planet, which had once been a beacon of peace and prosperity, was now on the brink of collapse. The Sithari had made sure of that. Their invasion was brutal and efficient, sweeping across the planet with merciless speed. The Zurath had no way of fighting back. They had no weapons that could match the might of the Sithari war machines, and that was why the humans had come. The Eagle's crest hit the ground with a soft thud, its landing gear absorbing the impact as the ship came to a halt in a small clearing at the edge of a dense forest. The Deathworlders had arrived. The cargo bay doors opened, and Captain Hayes, flanked by his team, stepped onto the soft, muddy ground. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of earth and plant life heavy in the air. The temperature was sweltering, but none of the humans seemed bothered. They had faced worse. Hayes surveyed the area, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The jungle surrounding them was dense, but the planet's strange flora and fauna weren't what concerned him. What concerned him was the sound of explosions echoing in the distance, the unmistakable signs of a war zone. It wasn't the Zurath fighting back. No, it was the Scifi pushing further into the planet's heart, decimating everything in their path. "Stay sharp," Hayes said to his team. "We don't know how close the Scifi are. Move out. We've got to get to the city." The team quickly moved into formation, their weapons ready, eyes scanning the dense jungle for any sign of danger. Their armor, though heavy, was designed for just such environments, light enough to move freely, but strong enough to withstand most of the threats they might encounter. Every soldier knew the stakes of this mission. They had been briefed on the importance of this fight. This wasn't just about stopping an invasion. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humans didn't back down, not from anyone, not from anything. The jungle around them was quiet at first, too quiet. Hayes had fought in plenty of hostile environments, and he knew better than anyone that silence was often a bad sign. His instincts told him they were being watched. "I've got movement," Sergeant Delgado whispered, her voice low but urgent. "It's fast, looks like a predator." "Keep moving," Hayes ordered, his eyes narrowing. The last thing they needed was a fight with one of the planet's native creatures. The Scifi were the true enemy here, but the jungle was dangerous in its own right. The creatures that roamed these woods were as deadly as the Scifi invaders, and many of them were still unknown to the humans. But as they pushed forward, the jungle seemed to come alive. Branches shifted and rustled in the breeze, casting long shadows that made it hard to tell what was lurking just out of sight. A few feet ahead, a massive tree exploded in a shower of leaves, a loud cracking sound splitting the air as something, huge and fast, moved through the trees above them. "Watch out!" shouted Hayes, but it was too late. From the treetops, a massive creature descended, its leathery wings slicing through the air as it landed with a heavy thud, causing the ground to shake. It was a massive beast, its scales glinting in the sunlight. Its body was long, covered in tough, bony plates, and its eyes glowed an eerie yellow. It looked like something out of a nightmare, its mouth filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. Without a word, Sergeant Delgado drew her plasma rifle, aiming it at the creature. The others quickly followed suit, their weapons raised and ready. The creature hissed, its sharp claws digging into the earth as it prepared to lunge. It was fast, faster than anything they had seen on Earth. "Take it down," Hayes ordered. The sound of blaster fire filled the air as the humans opened fire on the creature. The beast roared in pain, stumbling back as the plasma rounds hit its armored hide. But it wasn't enough to stop it. With a ferocious screech, it lunged toward them, its massive jaws snapping open. Delgado was the first to react. She dove forward, rolling under the creature's snapping jaws, and fired a series of precise shots at its exposed underbelly. The creature roared again, its massive body jerking as the shots pierced its skin. It stumbled, disoriented, before falling to the ground with a loud crash. "It's down," Delgado shouted, wiping sweat from her brow. Hayes nodded, his gaze still sharp. "We don't have time to rest." "Keep moving." With the creature dealt with, they continued their trek through the jungle, keeping their eyes peeled for any other threats. The sounds of battle grew louder as they neared the city, and the thick foliage started to thin out, revealing a clearing. The first sight of the ruined city was like a punch to the gut. What had once been a shining example of Zorathian architecture, tall, spire-like buildings made of translucent materials that shimmered in the light, was now a war zone. The city was in ruins, its beautiful streets littered with debris and the remnants of buildings that had been shattered by Scifi bombs. In the distance, the unmistakable form of Scifi warships hovered in the sky, casting long shadows over the city as they continued their bombardment. "This is bad," Delgado muttered. "They've hit hard." "We knew they would," Hayes said, his voice cold. "But we're here to change that." They moved quickly, taking cover behind the remains of a fallen building as they surveyed the area. The city was a battlefield, the ground littered with the wreckage of destroyed vehicles, shattered buildings, and fallen Zorathian soldiers. The Scifi had made their presence known, and it was clear that they had no intention of leaving until they had wiped out every last trace of resistance. "There are civilians here," a voice called from behind them. It was one of the Zorathian survivors, a tall, thin figure with glowing green skin. The Zorathian looked terrified, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. "Please, you must help us. The Scifi are everywhere." "We're here to help," Hayes assured him, his voice steady. "Where are the civilians?" "There's a safe zone not far from here, but we need to get past the Scifi forces." Hayes nodded, glancing at his team. "We'll get you there. Stay close and don't make a sound. We'll move fast." The group quickly set off, moving through the ruins with quiet precision. The Scifi forces had spread themselves out, but they hadn't yet reached the safe zone. It was a small piece of hope, a place where the Zurath could regroup, where civilians could be protected until reinforcements arrived. The humans knew they had to get them there, no matter the cost. As they moved through the streets, dodging patrols and skirmishing with small groups of Scifi soldiers, the gravity of their mission weighed on them. The Zurath were a peaceful people, and they had no experience with war. The Deathworlders had been thrust into the center of this conflict, not as mere observers, but as the last line of defense for a dying planet. The streets were filled with the sounds of distant gunfire, explosions, and the cries of the injured. But despite the chaos, Hayes felt a sense of determination settle over him. This was what they had come for. This was why they had answered the call. They weren't just fighting for a planet. They were fighting for the very idea of hope, the belief that no one, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed, was ever truly alone. The safe zone was just ahead. And despite the fire that raged in the streets behind them, the humans knew they would get the civilians to safety. They had to. The safe zone was within reach, but the journey was far from over. The path leading to it had been riddled with challenges, crumbling streets, fallen buildings, and the constant threat of Scifi patrols. Captain Lucian Hayes led his team through the desolate city, each step heavy with the weight of the responsibility on their shoulders. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future, both for the Zurath and for humanity. As they neared the safe zone, the sounds of distant explosions and gunfire grew louder. The Scifi were relentless, and they weren't about to let the humans or the Zurath escape without a fight. Hayes could feel the tension building in the air, his instincts sharpening with every passing second. The enemy was closing in, and the time for stealth was over. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. "We move in tight formation. Once we reach the safe zone, we'll fortify the perimeter. I want every exit covered." The team nodded, their faces grim but resolute. The civilians they were escorting had already started to gather in the small, makeshift shelter that had been set up in the heart of the city. It wasn't much, but it was the only place they could hope to hold out. The humans would make sure it was enough. Sergeant Mara Delgado, ever the pragmatist, checked her weapon one last time before moving up beside Hayes. "How much longer until we're there?" "Just a few blocks," Hayes replied, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "We're almost there. Stay sharp." The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and burning debris. The city, once a vibrant hub of Zorathian culture, now resembled a war-torn ruin. Tall, spire-like buildings that had once gleamed in the sun were now reduced to jagged skeletons, their windows shattered and walls crumbling. The streets were strewn with rubble, making every step a careful calculation. The jungle outside the city had been replaced by concrete and metal, a stark contrast to the wild, untamed land they had traversed earlier. But the enemy was no less dangerous here. From the corner of his eye, Hayes spotted movement. A Scifi patrol, heavily armored and armed with energy rifles, rounded a corner about 50 meters ahead. Their presence was inevitable, but their timing couldn't have been worse. There was no way to avoid them without being seen. "Take cover," Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The team dove behind nearby debris, their hearts pounding in their chests. Delgado pressed herself against a broken wall, peering around the edge to get a better look. The Scifi soldiers moved with precision, their weapons raised as they scanned the area. They were looking for any sign of the humans, and it was only a matter of time before they found it. Hayes glanced at his team. "We're going to have to fight our way through. Keep it tight." "Move fast." Without waiting for a response, he motioned for Delgado and the others to follow him. They moved quickly, using the debris as cover, their weapons raised and ready. The Scifi soldiers were close now, their heavy footsteps echoing in the ruined streets. Hayes held up his hand, signaling for the team to stop. They crouched low, barely breathing, as the Sithari came into view. Hayes took a deep breath. His mind was already calculating their options, weighing the risks. The Sithari were a formidable force, but they were far from invincible. The humans had faced worse. They had fought in deserts, jungles, and alien cities, each environment presenting its own challenges. But they had learned to adapt to survive. And now they would do the same here. Now, Hayes muttered, and the team sprang into action. The first Sithari soldier fell before he even had time to react. Delgado's plasma rifle crackled with energy as she fired, her aim perfect as she shot the soldier in the chest. The others followed suit, opening fire with deadly precision. The Sithari were caught off guard, their return fire wild and erratic. The humans had the element of surprise, and they weren't going to waste it. The team moved with fluid coordination, each member knowing exactly where to be and when. Hayes led the charge, his assault rifle barking as he took down one Sithari soldier after another. The Sithari tried to regroup, but the humans were too quick, too efficient. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their training and experience evident in every action. But the Sithari weren't going to go down without a fight. One of their soldiers fired a grenade launcher, sending a blast of energy rocketing toward the human's position. Hayes dove to the side, rolling behind a nearby column as the explosion rocked the street. The blast sent debris flying, but the humans were already moving again, their guns blazing. Delgado spotted a Sithari officer standing behind a barricade, directing his troops. She didn't hesitate. With a sharp, practiced motion, she adjusted the scope on her rifle and took the shot. The officer crumpled to the ground, his soldiers faltering without their commander. The humans pressed their advantage, pushing forward with ruthless efficiency. They cleared the street in a matter of minutes, taking down the last of the Sithari soldiers with surgical precision. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun, and the humans stood victorious. Hayes didn't waste time celebrating. They had a mission to complete. "Move out," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. "The safe zone is just ahead. We need to get those civilians inside." The team quickly moved forward, their pace unbroken. The safe zone was only a few blocks away now, and they could hear the sounds of the other civilians inside, their soft voices, the quiet murmur of hope. It was a sound they would protect with their lives. As they reached the safe zone, Hayes felt a sense of relief wash over him. The civilians had already begun to gather inside the makeshift shelter, a large, reinforced building that had once served as a city hall. Now, it was a refuge for the remaining Zurath, their only hope for survival. "We made it," Delgado said quietly, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and satisfaction. Hayes nodded, but there was no time to relax. The Sithari were still out there, and the humans had to hold the line. They couldn't afford to let their guard down, not now. "Get the perimeter set," Hayes ordered. "I want every entrance covered. We'll stay here until we have a way to strike back." The humans quickly began fortifying the building, setting up defensive positions and securing the entrances. They worked quickly and efficiently, knowing that every moment counted. The Sithari would be back soon, and when they came, the humans would be ready. As the last of the barricades were put in place, Hayes allowed himself a moment to breathe. He surveyed the civilians inside the shelter, Zorathians of all ages, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. They had lost everything, their homes, their families, their planet. And yet here they were, clinging to life with the hope that the humans could save them. Hayes walked over to one of the Zorathians, a young woman who looked no older than his own daughter. She looked up at him with eyes that held both gratitude and despair. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "We didn't think anyone would come." "We're here now," Hayes replied quietly, "and we're not leaving until you're safe." The words felt heavy, but they were true. The humans had answered the call, and they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Outside, the sounds of distant explosions echoed in the air, a constant reminder that the battle was far from over. But inside the safe zone, the humans and the Zurath had a fleeting moment of peace. It was a peace they would hold on to with everything they had. As Hayes looked around at his team, his resolve hardened. The Sithari would pay for what they had done. The humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for hope. The safe zone had been secured, but the battle was far from over. Outside, the sound of Sithari warships still echoed in the distance, their ominous hum reminding the humans that the war was not yet won. Inside, the civilians huddled together in a mix of fear and hope, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but their eyes brighter than they had been when the humans first arrived. They had been given a sliver of hope, and that made all the difference. Captain Lucian Hayes paced the length of the fortified building, his sharp eyes scanning the defensive perimeter his team had set up. Every corner was covered, every exit guarded. They had done everything they could to fortify their position, but he knew it wouldn't be enough if the Scifi decided to throw everything they had at them. "Captain," Sergeant Mara Delgado's voice broke through his thoughts. She stepped forward, her face grim. "We've got a problem." Hayes looked at her, his expression hardening. "What kind of problem?" "There's a large Scifi force moving toward us. They're closing in, and it's only a matter of time before they realize we're here," Delgado explained. "We won't be able to hold out much longer without backup. We don't have the luxury of waiting for reinforcements," Hayes replied, his mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll make do with what we have." Delgado nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll hold them off, but we'll need to be smart. The Scifi are going to come in heavy. We'll need to keep them off balance." Hayes met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "I know. We'll fight them on our terms." The humans had been through countless battles, but this felt different. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded on all sides by an enemy that had no intention of letting them escape. But one thing the Scifi didn't understand was that humanity had a deep well of resilience, and the humans had learned to survive against impossible odds. "Get the civilians into the inner rooms," Hayes ordered. "We need to keep them safe at all costs. No one gets left behind." Delgado nodded and moved to carry out the order. The other members of the vanguard followed suit, ensuring that the Zurath civilians were moved into the secure, fortified areas within the building. The humans worked efficiently, their years of training kicking in as they moved with purpose. Meanwhile, Hayes was already at work setting up the team's defenses. He knew the Scifi would come for them with everything they had. Their weapons, their technology, their relentless drive, they would be a formidable force. But humanity had fought in worse conditions. They had fought with nothing but their courage and their will to survive. Hayes looked over the team once more. Delgado, always the first to jump into action, was already making adjustments to their weaponry, ensuring that everything was in top working order. Specialist Jalen McKinnon was monitoring the communications array, ensuring that they could keep in contact with the Zurath survivors. Sergeant Dominic Ruiz, the team's sniper, was already positioned on the roof, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The tension in the air was palpable, but Hayes could see the resolve in their faces. They were ready. They had no choice but to be. The Scifi were coming, and the humans would not back down. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, the Scifi marching forward with mechanical precision. The ground shook as their war machines rumbled toward the safe zone. Hayes could hear the low hum of their energy weapons charging, the telltale sign that they were preparing for a full-scale assault. Hayes motioned for the team to take their positions. Delgado moved to a nearby window, her rifle trained on the advancing enemy. McKinnon stayed near the communications hub, making sure that the Zurath civilians were in contact with their allies. Ruiz, still on the roof, kept a close eye on the Scifi's movements. Then the first blast hit. The Scifi had arrived, their weapons unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that lit up the night sky. The humans returned fire with deadly accuracy, their weapons crackling with energy as they repelled the first wave of attacks. The walls of the safe zone shuddered under the force of the blasts, but the humans held their ground. Hayes's pulse quickened, his fingers tightening around his weapon as he took aim at the advancing Scifi forces. They had expected this, knew it was coming. But nothing could truly prepare them for the sheer force of the enemy's attack. The Scifi were relentless, their war machines moving in synchrony, their energy weapons cutting through the air like lightning. "Hold them off as long as we can," Hayes shouted over the din of the battle. "We've got one shot at this." The humans fought with everything they had, but the Scifi kept pushing forward, determined to crush the humans' resistance. The ground shook with each explosion, and the sky was filled with the glow of energy blasts as both sides exchanged fire. The humans, though outnumbered, fought like demons, their every move calculated and precise. They had no other choice. They couldn't afford to fail. Delgado, her face covered in grime and sweat, fired off another round from her plasma rifle, sending a Scifi soldier crashing to the ground. "We're holding them back," she said, though her voice was tight with strain. "But they're pushing hard." "We just need more time," Hayes said through gritted teeth. "Keep it up, Sergeant. We're almost there." Hours passed in what felt like mere moments. The humans held their ground, never giving an inch as the Scifi kept up their relentless assault. But as the battle raged on, something shifted. The Scifi, though powerful, were beginning to show signs of wear. Their forces were divided, their coordination slipping. It was a small crack in their armor, but it was enough. "Now's our chance," Hayes said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Take them out." In an instant, the humans switched tactics. Delgado and Ruiz, working in perfect sync, targeted the Scifi war machines, taking out the larger weapon systems with precise shots. McKinnon used the communications array to coordinate with the remaining Zurath survivors, helping them strike back at their invaders. Every human on the team moved with a purpose, their every action a calculated risk that paid off. The Scifi forces faltered, their advance slowing as the humans took down one war machine after another. The humans' resilience had cracked the Scifi's resolve. What had once been an unstoppable force was now on the back foot, their cohesion beginning to break down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Scifi forces began to retreat. They had underestimated the Deathworlders, and now they were paying the price. With the tide turned, the humans pressed their advantage, pushing forward to secure the perimeter once and for all. The battle was won. As the last of the Scifi forces retreated into the night, the humans stood victorious. Their bodies ached from the battle, their clothes torn and stained with the marks of war. But the job was done. The Zurath had been saved, and the humans had shown the galaxy what they were made of. The civilians, once cowering in fear, now stood in awe of their rescuers. They were alive, and they owed their survival to the humans who had risked everything to save them. Hayes looked at his team, and for the first time since the battle began, he allowed himself a moment of relief. "We did it," Delgado said, her voice softer now, the tension finally draining from her body. "We did," Hayes replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. "We showed them who we are." The humans had come to Zurath as strangers, but they had left as heroes. Their victory had sent a message to the galaxy: humanity would never back down. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and they had proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they would fight for what was right. And in that moment, as Hayes looked out over the ruined city, he knew that humanity's legacy had only just begun. There were more battles to be fought, more wars to win. But as long as the Deathworlders stood together, there was no force in the galaxy that could stand against them.